Hello, welcome to Talking with Machines, a space where Bryan Alexander, Tom Haymes, and I gather for conversations about the future of learning with digital tools. Today, our guest is Dr. Maha Bali, a professor of practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo. I'm Mark Corbett Wilson. A lifelong learner, artist, and retired high-tech glassblower, I spent 2 decades working in Surveillance Valley, making gas lasers, X-ray tubes, and the high-intensity lamps used in the manufacture of computer chips. Now I'm a critical digital humanist, the learning technologian at the Western Institute for Social Research in Berkeley, California, and a digital storytelling facilitator with StoryCenter.org. In sum, I'm a working-class educator in third spaces who helps people glean meaning from experiences and tell their stories. Friends, please introduce yourselves.
I'm Tom Haymes. I'm a teacher, writer, consultant, and currently trying to push the world into visual spaces using AI with the Knowledge Navigator project that I'm working on with Idea Spaces. I am deeply concerned about learning spaces in all kinds. I have been doing learning space design for 15 years in the physical sense and in the virtual sense. And so I'm always thinking about the spaces in which my students have to learn and which people in general have to learn and talk to one another because we're always learning, we're always teaching, whether you're doing it in the form of innovation at a company or whether you're doing it as a student in a classroom or in the hallway, which is the place we often overlook when it comes to learning spaces. So with that, I will hand that over to Maha.
I love that you ended with hallway conversations and hallways, right? And that'll come in a minute. But so, yes, I'm Maha. Mark gave the official introduction of my institution. I just want to clarify this is a hybrid institution. So it's an American institution, liberal arts style education, but it's based in Cairo, Egypt. And my main role is as an educational developer. So my main role is to help other professors with their teaching. And a lot of times that involves technology. So even before COVID, helping them with digital education, but also other things. And I am also a critical digital pedagogue rather than humanist. I remember I'm originally a computer scientist, and then I changed from there, did a master's in e-learning and then a PhD in education. And along the way, I became a critical pedagogue. And then I was struggling with how do I integrate that in the use of technology that I have to do in my job. And I discovered critical digital pedagogy. So that's where I am now. I do a lot of public scholarship work. So I have a blog, and we were just talking before we went on air about how important it is when you're working with technology to have a quick way to share what you're thinking about and not necessarily even like complete thoughts, even incomplete thoughts. I think when ChatGPT came out, it was important to share the questions I have more than the answers that I have. And I also co-facilitate a community called Equity Unbound, which originally started as an open intercultural connected learning curriculum that is equity focused. And it was originally for us to teach our students together globally, interculturally, but it became a thing where it became a community for educators. And it's quite emergent because what we do changes depending on what the world needs. So during COVID, we created a site for how do you build community online, and we gave people examples of that. And right now we run a few other events, which I'll talk to you as we go along today.
That's great. Thanks, Maha. I know that the next event, I guess, well, it's not an event, whatever it is, uh, intentionally equitable hospitality is coming up soon, and it is linked to
Yes.
Equity Unbound, but yet separate. So if you
Yes.
could talk to us about that. I joined you
Yes.
last year, and I'm looking forward to this year.
Yes. So let me explain what intentionally equitable hospitality is in the first place and where it came from. So intentionally equitable hospitality is a praxis. So it's got theory and practice in it. It's based on our experiences of trying to create equitable spaces. So we use the word hospitality because we believe anyone who's teaching or facilitating or hosting any space is responsible for making that space welcoming to others. So a lot of times we think about how you want to change power in a space and change the power dynamic. You're still hosting the space, you're creating what the space looks like before even people come in, right? So no matter how equitable you try to make it, you're responsible for everything related to that space. And that equity work needs to be very intentional. It's not just going to happen on its own, and you need to keep iterating on it, and sometimes you need to adapt and so on. This praxis was initially developed through something called virtually connecting, which was all about hallway conversations. So virtually connecting, I don't know if you guys know what this is, but we were, when my child was very young, I couldn't travel to a lot of conferences. And I wanted to be there, but I didn't want to be there to present my talks. I wanted to be there to meet my friends who I've been collaborating with on Twitter and so on online. And so we would connect with people at conferences. And people who couldn't be at the conference virtually would join on, at the time it was Google Hangouts on air. And we'd record it and live stream it to YouTube. And we'd have these conversations. But because there's a lot of power in hybrid conversations, and someone on one side is like a keynote speaker, another person is a graduate student, that's where the idea of how do we make this space intentionally equitable? How do we make sure that the white men in the room, no offense to you guys, don't dominate the conversation? How do we make sure that the person who's virtual gets a chance to speak, even though the people in the room are the ones who are privileged enough to be at the conference? So that's how it initially started. And a lot of the people who were with Virtually Connecting were also part of Equity Unbound or moved to it. And we realized during COVID that the principles of what we were trying to do applies to online learning in general. It's not just to Virtually Connecting. Like everybody needs to try to be intentionally equitable, right? So Mia Zamora, who's the co-founder of Equity Unbound with me, and our third co-founder is Catherine Cronin, but she's no longer involved. But Mia Zamora and I started to think about different activities you can do in an online classroom that you think are going to be equitable, but then what could go wrong and what can you do differently and how can you think about these things deeply? Eventually, Equity Unbound started to do this thing called Mid-Year Festival. And Mid-Year Festival is a 3-month professional learning journey. The concept behind it is this. During COVID, people started doing conferences online, right? And they were like 3-day conferences and 4-day conferences. And then life became hybrid and people started to come back face to face. And still the online conferences were three days. And I'm thinking, when I travel, I have a limited amount of time because I'm traveling and I'm coming back home. But when I'm online, why do I need to sit in front of Zoom for 6 or 7 hours a day? You get so much Zoom fatigue. Why do there need to be parallel sessions? So I have to choose them. Like, it's online. You can give me 3 months, right? So we were doing that. We were doing the Mid-Year Festival and offering professional development for educators all over the world over a long period of time. But we realized that people who weren't already part of our community, who wanted to come and facilitate a session, didn't know these equitable hospitality principles. So we started to do this IEH series, and we think it's useful for any educator anywhere, but definitely for people who want to facilitate sessions for us as well. And we don't tell them they have to come, but it's just an opportunity for everybody to have these conversations about what are the challenges of creating intentionally equitable spaces, online or face-to-face or in whatever context, and what are some tips that we can give them. And I can talk about very quickly, and this is open for registration. I don't know when this is going to go out, but we start April 15th. It's 4 live sessions, some asynchronous stuff. And if people are going to miss out on any of the synchronous stuff, we'll have an asynchronous alternative, inshallah. IEH has 4 phases. Usually when you think about being equitable, you think about how you design things and things like universal design, for example, and you think about facilitation in the moment when something goes wrong, how do you respond, right? But with IEH, we start with pre-design. And before you even start designing something, what books are you reading? Who are you having conversations with? Who are you involving in the design process itself? Are you involving students? Are you involving people from the most marginalized communities? So when you look at the group of us who are facilitating the IEH series itself, we have an undergraduate student who is blind. We have a facilitator from Kenya who is not in higher education. And you have my Equity Unbound program manager who used to be an instructional designer, but now is our program manager. That's her full-time job. From Egypt, and there's me as well as a professor from Egypt, and Mia Zamora, who is a professor of color from the U.S. And so, and 4 women and 1 man. The man is the undergraduate student. So if you think about this community, all of us are intersectionally speaking from very different backgrounds, and just every conversation we have as we plan what we're going to do, because of our different identities, helps us give a more nuanced flavor to every single thing we do. And so in this series, people have an opportunity to talk to other people who have that same mindset. I know in the US, it's a difficult time to talk about equity right now. And I think people need the space to do it outside their institutions. I find a lot of freedom outside my institution. I couldn't offer this kind of thing inside my institution, not because they don't care about equity, but I don't think they value it enough to offer it for this long. But a lot of people from my institution come to these sessions, you know what I mean? But I can't offer it in my official role.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to follow along through all of those iterations that you're talking about. And I met you through Mia when she was co-teaching an open course with Alan Levine, and participated in Equity Unbound and MyFest, and now IEH, which to me started last year. I don't, maybe it ran
There
before
was
that,
one
I guess.
before it as well. Yeah. What
Yeah.
did you find most valuable in the one from last year?
Well, what I really enjoyed was just the freedom of it, that it's sort of like an unconference where you can just contribute whatever you like. I like to make some images. I find
Mm-hmm.
most of higher education to be completely text-based mostly.
Mm,
And as someone who's not an academic and not trained only in language,
mm,
um, I don't make sculpture anymore, but I do create two-dimensional images.
yeah,
And so that to me is my favorite part, is the Padlet and
yeah,
the ability to contribute
yeah,
images just
yeah,
makes me very happy, because I spend
yeah.
most of my time with people that are text-based.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome. So speaking of what you were saying right now, one of the things that we were talking about as we were planning for the series is that a lot of times when people find out they're going to have someone who has a visual impairment, they avoid using images, and then they lose some of what makes their work engaging to other people, to the majority of people. And we were going to talk about sort of, so how do you include the person who has the visual impairment and at the same time maintain the things that will engage other people without excluding anyone, right? And so I remember one semester I had 4 students in my class who had visual impairment, and they were all actually completely blind. So they couldn't, like, enlarging text, no, you couldn't do any of that. And 3 of them were born blind, and one of them eventually became. And there's this game called Quick Draw. Do you guys know it? Oh,
no.
it's so cool. If this was a visual podcast, so now I have to describe it because people are not going to be able to see this. So Quick Draw is a game done by Google. You can search for it, where Google was learning how people doodle. It's an AI, pattern recognition AI, right? So it would tell you car, and you try to draw the car, and then it pretends it doesn't know, and it guesses what you're drawing to figure out that it's a car, and all kinds of things, right? And I always use this game to explain to my students how AI trains on human data. What happens is after you finish playing the game, you play like 6 different images and you're supposed to doodle them and draw them. At the end of this, it tells you, look at how other people drew cars. And that's how it learned. You don't feed the AI what a car looks like, right? You let the AI look at so many doodles of cars and it'll eventually figure out what a car is. And we talk about things that are funny, like nail, which could be a fingernail or a toenail, or could be the nail that you hit with a hammer. And because half the people go this way and half the people go the other way, it recognizes both as correct. All right? Now, try to play this activity with people who are visually impaired. Figure out a way. And I was experimenting with it. And in the end, what actually worked was I would tell them, it's asking us to draw X. How would you draw X? And they would start describing to me what they think I should do to draw the X. And then sometimes what they asked me to do would work. And they loved it. They were part of the activity. Yes, someone had to work with them. They couldn't just do it completely on their own like everybody else was doing. But then it became an even more interactive activity. You know, you're not just interacting with the machine, you're interacting with another human being who is your sort of gateway to the machine. And they were very interesting that came out of it. So, for example, when you asked one of my students who was blind, how would you draw a bicycle? Most of us sighted people would start with the wheels because they're big. She started with the seat because that's what she feels when she sits on a bicycle, which is the least important thing in the drawing because it's the least significant thing in the drawing because it doesn't show that much in a picture. It's a very small part of the picture. So those are very interesting things. And like when you ask them to draw a
And it's
beach,
usually covered
what
by
they
the
focus on.
human, if
Yeah, it's
there's a
covered
human
by
on
the
the
human
bike.
when they're sitting on it. Exactly, exactly, definitely. Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
that's interesting. I'm sorry, Tom. That's interesting that you're talking about human mediation, where so often
Yeah,
we're talking about technical or digital mediation, and here you've
yeah,
added another layer of human mediation.
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I actually I saw a recent thing. I in one of my other hats, I'm a photographer and I teach photography as well as political science. But I found I was there's a photographer who does these videos that I found, and he met this guy who is a blind photographer.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so one of the things about visually impaired is it's not on off switch. There's a spectrum, right?
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's not
yeah,
you see or you see black, or you
yeah,
don't see anything.
yeah.
So this guy had a neurological disorder which basically ate away his retinal nerves. So his eyes
Mm.
worked, but he couldn't get them to really he had a lot of trouble getting the brain to recognize that.
Mm.
And it's actually
Mm.
somebody with amblyopia. I have the same problem, except fortunately only in one eye. But
Mm.
but if you look at his pictures, they're very dramatic, and because he sees those shapes abstractly in a way that most of us overlook because we're seeing all this other detail that he doesn't see. And so you can definitely tell what he sees and what he can't see naturally through the viewfinder. And it's really interesting to see his stuff. I can share the link. I think I can
That's
find it.
amazing.
But
That's
yeah,
amazing.
so yeah, don't we shouldn't assume that visually impaired means you
Yeah.
can't see images, is my point there. The main point
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
trying to make
So
there.
these ones were because I
Yeah,
checked with these students. Yeah, but like like, yes, of course, somebody can be legally blind, but they have some. There are legally blind architects as well. So
sure.
also like a very visual discipline as well.
Yeah. So I mean I am very much I mean this is kind of one of the things I champion is that visual thinking is a much more democratic and egalitarian learning
Mm,
space than textual thinking
mm,
because you have to we all very young children you know the first thing they learn is visual thinking. I mean, they
mm,
learn to recognize their parents' faces and things like
of
that, and they
course.
go from there. They have to learn to read,
Yeah.
and that is, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I'm saying that that is a higher level, structured way of
Mm,
thinking about the information that is not necessarily 100% natural for humans. We have to learn to think in a
s-
certain way in order to be able to string that sentence together or to
mhm,
follow that sentence from one end to the other. And that's not always a natural process. And a lot of people struggle with that. Whereas
mhm.
visual thinking, I mean, there's a reason that advertising is so visual rather than a bunch of text saying, here, buy this
Right.
car, here are all the features,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yes.
you know that's not going to work. Or someone
Yes.
who writes syllabi and no one ever looks at them, right? So instead, I make diagrams of my classes for my students to show them
Yeah.
here's how you get from one part of the class to the other and why they hang together. But
Yeah.
one of the things that I've been working on, because the problem with visual thinking up to this point has been that it's extremely hard to construct.
Yeah.
The painting from Raphael behind me, uh, that took a
I was
little bit
so
of effort.
curious about that.
It's a picture I took. It's in the Vatican Museum, but
Yeah.
it's a good thinking space though. It's the academy that he did there with all the Greek philosophers sitting around talking to each other, and supposedly this
Yeah.
Renaissance version of what the Greek world looked like.
Yeah.
um, but the idea that a text is also a learning space, as
hmm
is a visual environment, as are physical environments,
Mm.
and so it's a very text, and everybody's, oh well, I do visual stuff, I do PowerPoint. I'm like, no, still a linear
Mm.
narrative. B, people
Yeah.
who don't do visual well put a lot of text on their slides.
Yeah.
Might as well make a handout at a certain point, I
Yeah, for
mean, it's a
sure, for
better
sure.
way of doing it. So
As you were saying this,
yeah.
it made me think about something. I took a course on game storming at some point, and
Hmm.
I learned I am not one of those people who I draw very well, but I'm not someone who naturally uses a lot of visuals for the sake of visuals.
Right.
But I use visuals when it makes sense to me. But what I learned in this course was also which shapes you use make a difference on the impact of what you're trying to express. And I noticed that some graphic designers and just some people in general don't think about which shape they're using. Like there's the difference between a circle and a square when you're trying to express something makes a huge difference to the
Right.
impact. And so one of the things that I did do not very well is I have a critical AI literacy model that has a visual.
Mhm.
Um, and the visual makes it look like you can start anywhere. And so I realized people were using my model in different ways. So even though the article describing it has an order, the visual doesn't. And so people were starting where they wanted to start and
Mhm.
getting very different results with how people responded to the model. And I'm like, oh no, actually you're supposed to do it this way. Or I do it this way. I mean, you can do whatever you want, obviously, but I mean, I do it this way. That's why I get a different result. And I realized the visual choice was not right. It's like
Yeah.
you need if it has
Are
an
are
order,
you
it should
familiar
look
with
like it
this
has an order.
book, Bob Horn's
No, but it
Visual
looks
Language?
nice. I
Yeah,
like
so
it.
this is like 15 years old. I met him recently
Hmm.
through another group that I'm working with. He's 93 now, and I
Hmm.
mean he could pass for 70. But we've been working on a number of the thing I'm trying to make with my so my version of AI is not ChatGPT. It is
Hmm.
how can I use AI to simplify complex tasks that were
Hmm.
unattainable for most people up to this point. And so I
Hmm.
want to actually use AI to generate visuals, not like Dolly, but I'm talking about
Hmm.
throw information on one end and then have it generate, say, a concept map or something like
Hmm.
that
Is there a
at
tool
the
that
other.
does that well right now?
No. And I mean, there are
Mm.
tools that generate concept maps, but they're really more brainstorming maps. What I want to do is find visual associations between information. So you can take
Mm.
any set of articles, even ones that are seemingly unrelated, and look
Mm.
for serendipities, to use the
Yeah.
word from your thing, but to these connections, these unexpected connections. In a
Yeah.
way, you can think about it is what I'm trying to do. A book, a textual book, is like the presentation in the conference room.
Mm.
Whereas a visual that creates randomized connections is like the
Mm.
conversations you have in the hallway. And
Mm.
that is where there's a lot of power there. And especially if you can then, the idea is to show something to a bunch of humans, not to tell them what to do. I say,
Mm.
first of all, I don't like calling it artificial intelligence. I prefer to call it augmented intelligence. And
Mm.
secondly, in the tradition of Doug Engelbart. But secondly, I look at it as if you're looking to AI for answers, you're doing it wrong. If you're looking to it for
Mm.
questions, that's where it's really powerful because it forces you out of your comfort zone in the way you look at things. And again, as a
Mm.
photographer, one of the things that I think is really important when I teach my students is like the difference between a boring photograph and an interesting photograph is often one of perspective. If you just shoot a glass of water sitting on a table from a human
Mm.
angle, it looks pretty normal. But if you get up underneath it and you get the reflections and the
Mm.
shapes and stuff, you can create a really cool image out of something very normal. It's just from looking at it differently. So I want to be able
Yeah.
to do that with information. And so
One
that's
of
what
the
I,
things
yeah.
when you talk about AI doing that,
Hmm.
there's I don't think for the most part AI ever gives things from my perspective as an Egyptian woman.
Well,
I think
so
it gives a diversity of Western perspectives, but it doesn't really.
it would if you fed it. So one of the other things that I want to do is I want to be able to control the inputs in the sense of, so when you and I go about the world and we look at things, we do this through the lens of what we've learned before. So, the readings that we've done, grad school, you
Hmm.
name it, we've built these filters over
Yeah.
time as people who learned for our entire lifetime. And I want to be able to use that filter to filter that information. So I want to be able to dump in my choice of information and then have AI
Yeah.
work from that. And so if you
Yeah.
have a literature that you want to make understandable to the world, this is one way to do it in
Yeah.
the sense of you put
So
your stuff in. One of the tools that I've used a lot lately is Notebook LM. I don't know if you
I
use
love
that.
it. I
Yeah.
love Google Notebook LM.
And so
And
you can
another one
control.
that does that is Perplexity has a place called Spaces, and you can
Mhm.
also do that. Because Google Notebook, my institutional account won't let me share what I do with others, but Perplexity allows me to share it with
Yeah,
others.
they make it
So
difficult. And I'm wondering whether
yeah.
that's copyright related, but um
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, because you're uploading documents that could be copyrighted. That's true. Maybe that's
right.
why.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
I
and
know
I've
you could, if you have an open source LLM, then you could tweak it and you could train it and all of that. But there's
that's what
still
I'm
an
working
issue
on.
here.
Yep.
There's still an issue here. because I was reading about this, and I'm not indigenous, but indigenous people sometimes have sacred data. And
Hmm.
their question is, do we give up our data sovereignty, our rhetorical sovereignty, give it into an AI? And then, of course, they could do their own local AIs that
Right.
even if it's still AI, it's still gonna mess up, right? It's still gonna do whatever.
Well, yeah, but again, you
It's
should
not like
approach it.
AI that's trained on a very specific thing, like in the medical
Yeah.
field, where it only detects breast cancer, or the one I did as an undergrad, which only predicts stock market prices. Wouldn't you like to try that one? One day ahead. Um, it worked well,
Oh, that's
actually.
easy. You just ask Trump what policy he's going to choose
What are
today,
you gonna
and
do
the stock
tomorrow?
market goes up and tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's not clear what he's going to do tomorrow. I want to point out that, we're talking about two layers of what I call augmented information processing.
Yeah.
Um, because I follow Kate Crawford's AI is neither artificial nor intelligent, but that's
Hmm.
another discussion.
Hmm.
But the underlying, the algorithms of the large language models are trained on Western data.
Hmm.
And then to add cultural data to it, is progress, I guess, but you're still using the underlying language model. And I'm looking forward to the day when there are language models trained on those other data sets, but
And
it does
only
bring up that
sometimes. Yeah.
And
it
I
does
think
bring
I
up
think
that
that
issue of indigenous data sets and whether
Yeah.
they want them to be. But again, if they were in control, they would decide
Yeah.
what data set they would use of their
Mhm.
own culture. So
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to those days, but until now, it's been such a large project and so
Mm.
expensive to do. But now these
Mm.
smaller versions are coming out, especially like DeepSeek
Yeah.
from China, that
Yeah.
are showing
Teaching
that
us
smaller
all other
models,
ways. Exactly.
Right.
that there
Other
are
And
other
ways.
and
ways.
to me that is the thing. I mean, if you think about a university as
Mm.
an AI,
Yeah.
we go to the university, we send people to the university and they learn a canon. They
Hmm.
are trained on data just like an AI would be.
Also hegemonic. Yeah.
Exactly. It depends on which university you go to, but
Mm.
one of the things that I get really frustrated with, I've had a lot of African students who come over,
Hmm.
and the thing I really struggle with them on is they venerate the Western uh,
Model.
model,
Canon. Yeah.
tome, whatever.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
think, and so they're constantly trying to copy it rather than speaking
Yeah.
with their own voices. And
Yeah.
that I can see as a direct product of colonialism,
Of
where they were
course.
taught that whatever the white man thinks is the best way to go. And that's a real struggle. Well, yeah, unfortunately, most of my colleagues probably don't share that level of sensitivity to it,
Mm.
in the sense that and they probably don't, you're just plagiarizing, fail. But if AIs, I think, offer us the possibilities of giving a machine that university education in a sense, and then being able to share that more broadly and cheaply than would otherwise be the case. And I think that will democratize the conversation. I think there's a possibility there.
Wasn't the internet already kind of doing that, but
It
with
was, but
accountability and transparency?
the problem with the internet,
With an
yes.
AI helping you find the thing instead of giving you the answer?
Right. I mean, imagine somebody pushes you into a library with no card catalog and they say, go find something. Well, yeah, you'll probably find something, but you're going to miss an awful lot, unless you have some sort of map and pathway to find your way through the information. I think the internet actually makes it worse because, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing in the sense of I think that's where we need to go, but right now we're in a point where there's too much information because we've gotten really good at producing information, and
Hmm.
where we fail is in connecting information. I
Mm, I
want to
like
under,
that.
I want to understand how the for instance, how the Africans influenced the British or the French or whoever the
Hmm.
colonials were. They did, but that often gets buried, and you can't flip
Hmm.
that very easily.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of hard work to get there. I want to again make that easier. So if I could load, say, for instance, a bunch of African documents about colonialism, a bunch of French or British documents about
Mm.
colonialism into an AI and say, show me where these things cross,
Hmm.
where are the connections, where am I seeing the same coin from two different sides? That would be tremendously valuable as a researcher, at the very least, and as a teacher. You know.
Mm. I can see what you mean. So you would do the hard work so that other people don't have to.
Well, the idea
So
is
that
the
other
AI,
people can access it more easily.
right? The AI would do the grunt work. You build an AI
Mm,
to do the grunt work, which I think, I mean, to me, the beauty behind transformer AIs is that what they're doing is they're making connections between words. That doesn't
mm,
always work,
mm,
and sometimes does it wrong. I don't mind. I love hallucinations because a lot of times
mhm.
hallucinations are just an alternative view of reality that we should look at, not necessarily accept blindly. Just because somebody writes something down doesn't mean you have to believe it. Just because it's
Mm,
on TV doesn't make it true. Same
mhm.
thing's true with AI. We need to have that same sort of skeptical approach to it. And I think
Of
that's
course.
fundamentally as humans what we have to
Yeah.
bring to the table because the AI is not going to be a skeptic because it doesn't know any better.
Yeah. 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 It doesn't know anything. So I love what you're saying there. I think even though I think there's two things. The one about the internet being a problem because there's too much information. With AI, now we're gonna have a lot of AI generated information, and we're gonna have even more trouble
Hmm.
checking whether the AI generated information is accurate because there's going to be so much junk on the internet more than there already was junk on the internet.
But we need
And
an
the
AI
issue
to fix that
is,
problem,
yeah, we need
unfortunately.
an AI to fix that problem. The other thing is, even with all the junk on the internet, we had a system, and were you talking to Mike Caulfield recently? So we had a system for detecting misinformation before AI. But now with AI, we need to rethink everything, right? Because you don't know whatever the AI produces, even when they link, even all these AI tools that now link to the source of what they're saying, you go to that source and it's not saying what they say it's saying. So it's
Hmm.
a real source. It's not like ChatGPT making up sources, but the link doesn't actually say what it says it says.
Yeah.
And this kind of thing is frustrating, even sometimes with the Google Notebook LM and Perplexity occasionally, but Google Notebook LM does very well when it's one article. When there are more articles, it can go a little bit crazy with the connections. I
Hmm.
understand why that's happening. I understand how AI works. Um, but I want to go back to, let's talk about a couple of kinds of AI that we've had for a long time. We've had machine translation,
Hmm.
and I know these are different from ChatGPT, but ChatGPT also does translation. But anyway, machine translation and OCR, right? That converts an image into not an image, text-based stuff that is not machine readable into machine readable text, and also
Right.
they identify images and stuff. It's really important. Machine translation is really useful. It allows you to read things in languages that you otherwise wouldn't have read. And
Hmm.
also, there might be like a 1% misunderstanding in the translation that makes you totally misunderstand something and cause a huge problem. And the problem is you're skeptical because you understand these kinds of things. A lot of people aren't, and I'm seeing in the same way that were spreading fake news who are like academics and very well educated people.
Hmm.
Um, I'm seeing young people and older people trusting AI a lot more than they should be. And things like automatic translation needs not to be trusted 100%. The better it is, the harder it is to remain skeptical because the mistakes are so minimal that you might miss them. And if you don't speak the two languages, then it's going to be so much harder for you to know that something went wrong. And I'm concerned about diminishing numbers of people who are experts in these things in order to make sure
Yeah.
that someone's checking that this is actually
Have you ever
good
seen
quality and real stuff.
the Monty Python sketch, the Hungarian phrase book?
No, I've never watched Monty Python. Americans talk about it all the time. It's a British thing, though, isn't it?
It's
It
British,
is.
absolutely.
But Americans talk about it all the time.
Yeah, well, it's kind of infiltrated it's a certain layer of our culture, but
Mm,
there's a skit where they take a Hungarian English phrase book and they basically
mm,
translate into things that are going to get the people into trouble. Like they're buying a
mm.
cigarette and they say, "I want to kiss your face" or something like that, and and
That's so funny.
the author gets brought, the publisher gets brought up in court for publishing with the intent to cause bodily harm and stuff. It's hilarious. But I was just thinking about that. But yeah, I mean, I think again, that's what we need to be teaching those. We need to be teaching a level of skepticism and that critical thinking. And I think we struggle with that because we spend so much
Mm,
time teaching the text itself many
mm,
times that we don't have time. People say they teach critical thinking, but you see what people spend their time on in class.
yeah.
What I always had to struggle with
Mm,
spending my time when I try to teach content. I've largely thrown content to the side in my
mm,
class because I
mm.
spend most
I
of my
agree.
class teaching my students how to learn, how to think.
Yeah.
And that's a struggle all in of itself. And of course, there's so many educational systems where it's
Yeah.
basically listen to what the man on the podium says, write it down and repeat it
Mhm.
back, and you've learned something, but you really haven't. And
Yeah.
so that is, and if you transfer that to AI, you're listening to an even stupider man on the stage, although
Yes.
I've seen some pretty stupid men on the stage.
Yeah, that's where I need to come in. I'm going to agree with you there. Um, and just to circle
yeah.
back, Maha, I saw Jim Groom and Mike Caulfield talking just this morning, and
Mm.
Mike, I don't know if you saw it, but on his Substack, has posted an updated SIFT method that he
Oh,
converted
that's
for
good.
Claude. And it's a
Interesting.
very long prompt. It's a multi-page prompt that you can put
Uh-huh.
into Claude as a project and save it. And so now
Uh-huh.
you've got this SIFT generator. And then because it came out a couple weeks ago, I dropped a CIA release document about the Kennedy assassination in there, and it did a very good job. It's a very long prompt, and
Mm.
I'll share the link in the chat for you
Yeah.
in a moment.
I
But it
opened it.
was,
I opened Mike's,
oh, okay.
but I
Yeah,
don't know if
so
it has
that's
the
just from a
prompt that
couple
you're
weeks
talking
ago.
about.
I'm
Pardon?
gonna have to
Oh, I
circle
found
back
it.
around to
I
that
found the
one.
prompt. Yeah, I
I
found it.
used
Speaking
the
of
SIFT
which,
in my
go ahead.
class.
Yeah, I
So,
used to use SIFT in my class too. So now I'll use the updated version. But I want to tell you something that happened to me in class the other day. I was showing something to my students that they could do with AI, which is to generate scenarios for a game that they're then going to create on another platform. And I used the word generate at the beginning of the prompt with GPT 4.5, and it just created the code and then it made it interactive and it ran it and finished the project. This was like supposed to be like step two in their project, and it just finished the project. And there were like three more steps coming up. I was like, oh, oops, I have to change my assignment. I think we need to be flexible and just recognize it's really hard. It's really hard for educators to keep doing this. Not everybody is as experimental or flexible, and maybe they think, but yeah, we need to figure out what's really important that we're teaching that cannot be done with AI.
Our systems of education do not give educators enough time to step back and think about these things. The
That's true.
pressures are
That is very
elsewhere,
true. Yes. They're just
and that's
expected to make time for it in the midst of everything else that's already keeping them 120% busy.
right, and that's not what they're evaluated on.
Of
Which they're
course.
evaluated
Yes.
on false metrics, which are equivalent to the drunk
Yeah.
driver looking for his keys under the street light because that's where the light is. You know.
Oh, that's awful.
so I've
But
been
this is also
focusing.
what leads to people using AI to give you peer feedback
Yeah,
and using AI to write articles that reference articles that were never written. Sorry, go
I
ahead, Mark.
yeah, no, I had that experience with a professor a few weeks ago where he was like, "Oh, I figured out this great way to get ChatGPT to grade my stuff for me." And I'm like, "Okay, well, who needs you now?" I
Yeah.
mean,
If you
if
didn't want to
that's
read your student's work, don't assign it. If you don't want to read it, don't assign it.
well,
What's
it's
the
not
point of
just
them
that.
writing it?
It's that what are you assigning that is dumb enough for ChatGPT to give meaningful feedback on?
That's as good as you, also.
Yeah,
How dumb are
exactly.
you
Yeah,
that ChatGPT
exactly.
can do it?
Right. And
Back to my
that's
experience with those that subclass of professors. So what I also wanted to say was I recently been focusing on these translations because people are starting to use, in meetings, the
Mm,
automated minute
mm.
taking and all of that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so I've been spending more time lately taking these transcriptions, from YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
from other uh, transcription services, and then doing
Yeah.
the hard work, which, man, does it take a lot of time to copy edit a transcription following the audio.
Mm,
And
mm,
you're right that sometimes they're 99%, so those are the best case,
mm.
but one word can completely change the meaning
For
of
sure,
that
for
transcription.
sure.
And there's often places where words are replaced. There are
Mm.
dropouts in the transcription.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
was a complete sentence missing in a YouTube, just in a 10-minute
Oh,
clip that I was
okay.
transcribing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, you mentioned earlier, Maha, you're becoming, more and more skeptical. And I'm going
Mm,
to agree with you, but we started
yeah.
from being skeptical, but the more we work with it, the
Yeah,
more skeptical we're
yeah,
becoming.
yeah,
And
yeah.
now that everybody, few years later now is really adopting a lot of this, you really
Mm.
have to tell the cautionary tale.
Yes, and
Uh,
nobody wants to hear it.
exactly. Especially
And
now
you
that
get shamed.
institutions are.
people, yeah, people
So,
stop me. How dare you say bad things about AI? Someone once told me you're spreading AI hate speech. I'm like, hate speech is something you do against a group of people who are marginalized. AI is not a person. I am telling you these things are a problem with AI. You can use it and love it, but it still has these problems. But can I say something about this AI transcription thing? And this is another thing, again, related to the dominance. It does so badly in Arabic, you have no idea. It just completely misunderstands the entire conversation.
mm,
I wish it wouldn't attempt in the first place, but it still attempts. And then I have to tell you guys two other things related to this. Speaking of harm, also, there's a commercial company that's trying to pretend that it's doing AI for good by doing open source stuff and inviting people to volunteer to help record low resource languages, including Arabic dialects. Okay? But it's a commercial company. And I'm like, why are you doing this? And they're like, well, we'll make it open for everybody to use. So then they can exploit people and not pay them for giving them their data. And then it will make their company also serve people better. But one of the things that my Egyptian computer science professors who work in AI and especially the natural language processing have told me is one of the reasons AI has been trained to translate from Arabic to English so well is for US military surveillance reasons of Arabs in the US. Hey, Bryan, you came at exactly the right time. We're talking about the use of AI for surveillance.
I guess
Hi.
that's the right time. It's very nice to see you, Maha.
Nice to see you too.
Bryan is always watching.
And so then the rest of this story is there's a commercial company that's doing open source AI that's trying to help improve AI training on low resource languages, but they're exploiting people to do this as a volunteer thing and not paying them. And I was saying the need for Arabic to English translation, a lot of it was because of military surveillance of Arabs in the US. And the thing is, the difficult thing is every Arab country has a different dialect. And so this company trying to tell us we're going to support your culture by getting these dialects is also using us to help us catch people like us in surveillance.
Egyptian's very
So
different, isn't it?
Egyptian is very different and the
Yeah.
easiest because
Oh,
we're the pop culture people, because we have more movies and songs and stuff.
you can watch the TV and
But
learn
it's
it
also
that
the
way.
farthest, it's the farthest, I think it's the farthest from standard Arabic.
Yeah, that's what I've always heard. I'm not. I got German and French. That's as far as I go.
So, Bryan, just to catch you up, assuming you haven't been listening, we hit the last half hour or so, we've been talking about our engagement with AI and how we're becoming, in some senses, more critical the more we use it. But now that our futurist friend has showed up, let's turn more to future uses. And I definitely want Maha to talk a bit more about hospitality and equitable inclusion going forward. But Bryan, if you can jump in just a bit on AI and the future uses that you're seeing.
What framework of future? Are we talking about next 6 months, next year,
Yeah, near future. Yeah, we're just talking today, near future.
higher education, or the world as a whole?
We've been discussing higher education. And also Mike Caulfield was on with Jim Groom earlier today. And I mentioned that, have you seen his updated SIFT model that he made for
Yeah.
Claude? Yeah. So anything you might say about that?
Right now, nothing to add about SIFT. And my apologies for my schedule. I'm participating in a online conference about AI in higher education. So this morning I led a panel, and this afternoon I had an interview, and in 18 minutes I have to go to my next session for that. So the scheduling here is tricky. What I'm hearing
We're
are,
glad you can join us.
well, I appreciate the opportunity, and it's good to see Maha again. What I'm hearing and seeing are a few things. One is an increasing divide about over AI in academic attitudes across faculty, staff, to some degree, students. It's not exactly the classic Rogers diffusion of innovations model, in that, yes, we do have early adopters and we have the opposite, but it's also we saw that pattern in previous technology. We saw that with the web. We saw it with the internet. Before that, we saw that with mobile devices, but now it's, I think, broader and deeper, in part because AI is potentially such a larger technology, but also because of the politics around it, which Maha may have already spoken to, and she writes very well about in her blog and in her scholarly articles. Second thing that I'm seeing is a lot of enterprise level uncertainty and chaos. That basically a lot of the commercial AI is too expensive for a campus to license at an enterprise level. There have been some attempts to do that, a few different projects like Amplify and I think Boodlebox, but none of them have really taken off, which means that people on campuses who want to use AI are often doing so on an individual basis, which has all kinds of equity issues and challenges when it comes to the paid ones. Now, some of these AI tools are actually brought on board at the enterprise level because of pre-existing contracts. So we think about Microsoft or Google primarily, who bring in AI into Google Docs, into Microsoft 360, and so on, which then brings other challenges for people who don't want to use them. Joshua Ayler, I think I've mentioned this program before, has his idea is that the default setting for AI in higher education should be off. That class, unlike say the LMS or in Europe the VLE, where you have a kind of pre-populated shell for all classes about the fact that they're never doing anything. In Ayler's point of view, you should have it turned off so that faculty would have to opt in. So it's the opposite of an opt-out approach. And I'm happy to say more about that. Uh, Another thing is that the divide is taking very, very different registers. So, for example, the pro AI side often argues in terms of the workforce, that the argument being that the workforce is changing and that AI will be a key part of it, and so students have to be prepared in order to use it. There's also in the U.S. I'm not sure about other countries. Perhaps I mean I'd be really curious to see this in Japan, South Korea, Australia, for example. But there's the geopolitical argument that there's a world race for AI, basically towards AGI or superintelligence, and that academia has to play a role because the argument in in making that happen. So this is partly an R&D argument that academia has to play a bigger role in just innovating and producing more stuff. But also that this means the world is changing, so everyone involved needs to learn how to use the stuff and to think about it. Um, Another thing I'm seeing is the push for AI literacy. Maha, have you already talked about that today?
Yep, a little bit.
Okay. So I'll just mention that that's one approach that is in the air. Um, on top
What
of
does that actually mean?
Oh, it's a great question. Maha will have her model for that, which is great. Brent Anders has his model. I'm just right now working with one university which has its own internal model. But it's something less than a computer science degree in AI and something more than knowing nothing at all. For a lot of people, it involves a combination of hands-on skill along with the conceptual framework around it, and the conceptual framework could, and I think should include both, what is an LLM, how is that different from other technologies, along with an understanding of its implications, positive and negative. Some critical learning should be part of that. Uh,
Absolutely. One of the problems I've had for a long time with this idea of digital literacy, which has been around for a while, we've talked about, and this is just the next iteration of that, is that in my mind, literacy is literacy, and that we need to teach people how to think about information. We need to teach people how to think about technology critically as a whole, whether that technology is an AI, Google, the internet as a whole, whatever you want to call, that, and a book and an article and a magazine article versus or CNN or TV and all these things. These are all information platforms and technologies
Mm.
for spreading information. And there are certain rules that my students certainly don't understand that apply to all of them in terms of, again,
Mm.
critical literacy, I think is a better way of saying it, but of having that.
Maha, is this
Yeah.
does this align with what you're doing?
Yeah, so I'm happy you said critical because what I've realized is that you can't teach critical AI literacy if you haven't taught critical thinking in the first place. And the other thing related to the polarization that Bryan's talking about, and I was telling you guys about AI shaming, and I always tell people that's not AI shame. There are good reasons to resist AI. There are good reasons to like AI. Let's have a conversation and not hate each other over this. But the critical part that I want to say is, if someone does not view the world with a social justice perspective, then explaining to them social justice implications of AI is going to fall on deaf ears because they don't even understand what we're talking about. They don't understand why bias is a huge issue. No, I said people won't listen to me at all, and they'll stop me from talking to say something bad about AI if they like it.
Oh, in terms of,
But I have a blog post on this.
well, there's I agree with both of you in terms of the general literacy framework. I mean, you think the library world really pushes this very strongly starting in the 1980s with information literacy, which is sometimes information fluency, which then builds up into digital literacy. And before that, you can go to media literacy, which really goes back to the 1960s. And obviously, you can find antecedents before that. But I think this is important. And also, this is what I'm hearing from just about every single academic institution, group, meeting, is everyone is saying we've got to bear in mind, and they will have problems that would be subject to thinking about in terms of critical thinking. I mean, the bias comes up, I think, probably most frequently. Environmental stresses come up less often, but also I think awareness of business models. I mean, there's so much there. But yeah, I think in some ways the problem with AI literacy is that institutionally it's hard to find someone whose job it is to do that. So it's not computer science, it's not the library. So who? And then it really falls back to the chief academic officer, and they have no money, and they have to figure out how to do this.
In my image, in my institution right now, I'm it.
Say,
And like
having
try to create a 3-hour course, self-paced course that students are actually going to take. And they have such I'm like, you need different pathways. Students are at such different levels of their own interaction with AI. And it's very funny, like in a freshman class, where I tell, so which AI tools do you use? And they're like, this is a trick question, right? I don't use AI. And then of course all of them, what are you talking about? All of you use AI.
well, those are two things I completely agree with. And one is, except I disagree with the first part. I think it'd be great to have a Maha Bali on every campus. Unfortunately, we don't. And having one person who happens to be there who is brilliant to do that is not scalable or sustainable.
There's a lot of free things, but how are you going to get people to make the time to do it when they have other priorities?
Yes.
And Tom was just talking about this. The institutions want the faculty to get up to date, and they're not doing anything to help give them time or to incentivize this time or to reward them for even innovating or trying. And you know what? The thing we don't talk about enough about innovation, usually the first time you do something, it doesn't go so well. And you can get really bad student evaluations for it. And if you're not tenured or if you're just part-time, people are scared
Absolutely.
of just doing the wrong thing here and getting fired or not being
Absolutely.
renewed.
Yeah, and so this is something where we need institutional support, and that's generally not happening. I mean, what most institutions are not doing this from a top-down level.
I thrive on institutional indifference. I do all
Yes.
sorts of crazy things and just sort of get away with
Yeah,
it because nobody's paying attention.
underground. Yes,
Then,
yes, I
and
agree.
I mean so I think that's one of the great challenges. And of course, around the world, depending on where you are, different countries are going to have challenges with this because of the situation. So a lot of European institutions are facing economic problems because Europe is turning towards a defense footing now. So that's going to involve draining money from public services, which includes higher education. If you look at Canada or if you look at Australia, for example, both of those countries are doing a fantastic job of cutting international student numbers. I'm saying fantastic job in sarcasm here in case that doesn't come across here. And of course, in the US, we're not just shooting ourselves in the foot. We're taking a howitzer and taking aim at both feet, right? So in this situation, it's very, very
I think you're
difficult.
aiming a little low there, Bryan.
Well, you got to start somewhere. But this makes it difficult to find resources, and it also makes it difficult to find political capital. When people are worried about their jobs, when they're worried about their security, to say, hey, by the way, here's revolutionary technology, we've got to use it. Speaking of revolution, my meeting at 3:10 p.m. Eastern time, people are asking me to be there now. So I'm afraid this is just a cameo for me right now.
It was
Well,
good to
thanks for
see
checking
you.
in.
Thanks
It's
for
great seeing
popping
you.
in. So
Well,
happy to have seen you.
Tom and
Have
Mark,
Thanks,
fun.
thank you
Bryan.
for hosting, and Maha, please, it's good to see you. Please take care and keep up the good work.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
So, as we move towards the end of the conversation here, I would I would like to move us back. So I'll point out that there are some digital humanists hanging around that might be appropriate for that role, but institutions have no interest in that. So that's why I'm working in third spaces. So I would like Maha for you to return to IEH, intentionally equitable hospitality, how you do open up the institutions, or how people that are academics and are in institutions participate in this, and it is open to everybody else, and how that can move us into this new future where we
Yeah.
have to engage with these tools, even if we reject them, we have to engage with them. And by opening up this conversation, and it is in a sense worldwide,
Yeah,
what you do,
for
how you
sure.
think that this is going to help us.
Yeah. I think there's been a lot of moments that we've encountered recently, COVID, and then going back to like hybrid, and then now with AI that is affecting academics everywhere in the world in similar ways. Of course, not exactly the same because of resources and bandwidth and all that, but still. Um, and I found that having these conversations with people from outside your institution frees you up a little bit more to talk. When one of the things, Anna Mills, one of my collaborators who's done a lot of work on AI, uh, we met in we knew each other, but we weren't close. But we got together in January. We're like, let's do workshops for people to show them hands-on what AI can do with their assignments. And this is something that I had to do outside my own institution first, because if I do it in my institution, I'm not the director of my department, but I am a known person that they listen to. And I don't want to say something that gets misinterpreted as, oh, this is the university policy because Maha said so. So it's so important for me to do a lot of things in these third spaces outside my institution where people are from everywhere, experiment with it. People from my institution can come, but they know I'm not representing my institution in that space. Make mistakes, try things out, and then learn and come back into the institution and do what we want. And a lot of people join us in Equity Unbound and in places like Intentionally Equitable Hospitality because they can't have these kinds of conversations in their institutions. People aren't having the conversations. And it's strangely safer to be public and open and outside than to be inside a lot of the times, unfortunately, for a lot of people in our community. And then what happens, I think, is we're hoping that then people will figure out who their allies are within their institution, bring them, and then you build a network and build allyship. And this is kind of what's happening in my institution right now, like with things like ungrading. I'm getting to know who wants ungrading because I'm doing a lot of things online that they're coming to, and then I realize who they are. And now we know there's quite a few of us inside my institution who like ungrading, but nobody was saying it out loud to their department chair, you know?
Well, that's interesting. You're sort of identifying the vanguard
Mm.
outside the institution,
Yes.
and then you'll be able to
Yeah.
work together.
Although my
Um,
provost follows me on Twitter, so that's also a little worrying, but it's okay.
yeah,
I don't use it as
that's a
much anymore
double-edged
now.
sword for sure. Um,
Well, I
Anna
think
Mills is here in California, and I've been lucky to I was a beta tester for
Mhm.
my essay feedback, which is the project that she's been
Mm.
working with. So I've
Yeah.
been working with Anna for more than a year, and I was happy to see that you two got together,
Yeah.
and are helping move this forward. Um,
Well,
Here's a
not this
project that
particular
is
one. This is one
human.
that we disagree with a little bit. She does it
That's
better than
fine.
what I assume people will do, for sure.
Yeah, that's fine.
Uh,
Just to point out that anybody that wants to take a look, it's myessayfeedback.ai, and this is human mediated AI feedback for writing for students. And so it's run by English teachers, and they are the human in the loop, as the military says. And so this is a different model, and it's worth looking at. All I'm saying is it's worth looking at. I'm not a big, fan of
mhm.
AI writing feedback or any kind
Mm.
of feedback at all, really. Um,
But
it
for
seems,
autonomous learners in a large course, it could be
well,
really useful.
again, yes, but with proper instruction. So back
Yeah.
to the onboarding or the instruction or the orientation with the proper orientation. And that's how my essay feedback works. It's not writing the essay for you. It's taking your drafts and making suggestions based on English teachers' input to help you construct essays. And that to me is much more useful. And that is one that I would like to see promoted. Again, I'm not in an institution, although I'm adjacent to a graduate program institution in Berkeley. And that would be, if we ever get that far, my institution was progressive 50 years ago and now is old fashioned, but in a progressive way. So it's very confusing that they're resisting technology. But my hope is that when they do start to adopt it, that it will be this much more mature approach that they didn't dive in 2 years ago or 4 years ago and just start using it indiscriminately. So my hope there is, there's the idea of slow adoption has some advantages. And so in this case, the slow adoption wasn't my choice, but I'm hoping the advantages become clear.
I think, by the way, we kind of make a mistake when we limit this to students. There are a lot of very educated people, particularly in the sciences, who are lousy writers. And I don't want to pick on them for being lousy writers because their job is science. Their job is not to be a good writer. And yet they're forced to communicate in a textual way with other people, which is a problem if normal people can't understand what the hell they're saying half the time. And so I do think that there is a role again for with a good critical eye. I mean, they should obviously read things before they send them out. Of make me a version of this scholarly article that would go in a popular magazine so that people can understand the ideas. And oh, this climate change
100%.
thing's a thing, right? You know, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest problems we've had with climate change, the debate over climate change in the last 30 years, is because the people who are fighting about it are fighting about things most people didn't understand until very recently, when suddenly things became very real for people. And so all of a sudden they're like, well, why did this happen? Well, this guy wrote about it 30 years ago, but you couldn't understand what he was saying, you know? And those of us who have the skill and educational level, maturity, whatever you want to call it, to navigate those pathways, is have an advantage there. But even I struggle with certain things. I mean, I love Marshall McLuhan. I hate the way he writes. Drives me crazy because he's like dropping references right and left. I'm like, what the heck is he talking about here, right? But the ideas, once you get to them, are brilliant. But the amount of effort it takes to get to those ideas, and that's something I touched on in the blog. I dropped the link in the chart. But the other thing I would say, getting back to your earlier point about institutional adoption and institutional support and so on and so forth, we should not underestimate how much these technologies threaten the structure of the institutions themselves. Because what we have seen with the democratization of technologies going all the way back to the PC, we suddenly put all this power in the hands of individuals, to Google, now to AI, is that you can be a nonlinear learner. You don't have to, we have to recognize that our traditional academic pathway is linear, just like a book. You go through it in a certain sequence. It may be a different book for different people, but you're still doing that in a certain way, which may or may not make sense for an individual student in terms of their ability to complete, because they may need more time here or less time here, or they may want to, they don't see this whole other part of the world that would be perfect for their interests and loves, but
There are
nobody
a
ever
lot of
told them about it.
non-technology. This is a social problem, right?
Oh yeah, no,
There are a
it's a
lot of
systemic
non-technology
problem.
solutions to this. Of course,
Yeah.
some technologies can help with it, but a lot of times the technology will just reproduce the
But I
same
think
kind of
that I
thing.
think that the
So,
way AI approaches ideation is a threatening thing in terms of that model, because it can pull from anything and anywhere. And I think that's one of the cool things. I can put a sociology book and a political science book and a history book and a math book or a physics book all in one notebook LM and say, tell me what's in all of these books and what do they have in common?
that's a good
That to
point.
me is really interesting
Yeah.
stuff, because when you get into disciplinary thought, and that's another problem, it's a specialization that's a product of the industrial world, you get shoved down this funnel And, you take political science, which is what I did, and I always have approached political science as applied history. Well, that's an anathema to a lot of people in my field,
Mm,
because they're like, no, no, you use these formulas and you learn how to read polls and you do all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, but if you don't understand the context, it it loses all this meaning
yeah.
and richness, and no wonder you miss this stuff because these people don't act like it doesn't make sense for these people to vote this
Mm,
way
mm,
unless you understand the cultural thing. They're voting against their interests. Why are they voting for this guy? That sort of thing. And that only happens, and that's the other thing about climate change. Climate change is no respecter of disciplinary boundaries because it's biology, it's geology, it's meteorology, it's all of these different things, and it's also politics and social decision making because we know how to fix it or how to stop doing it, but we don't have the political will or capital to do that
mm,
in
yeah.
any
It's
country.
not a scientific problem, it's a political
Right. It's a
problem.
human problem we created, but it's also going to have to be a human problem we uncreate or whatever,
Yeah,
overcome.
yeah.
And so
I
these
want
are
to go
things that,
back
but
to,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, I want to go back to what you were saying, and I agree with you 100% that I always say, in general, if it's something that's difficult for someone to read and they use AI to understand it, that's a good use of AI.
yeah,
And if you don't want to write it in a way, or you're not capable of writing it in a way that's more accessible, then at least they'll understand what was in it. They'll miss some nuance, but that they'll understand. So, and related to what you were saying, scientists and engineers, and this is what I always tell our writing professors. The engineers have done the work in the lab. Now, having AI write it up for them is not the learning that they're going to lose, right? They've done the learning. Just getting
yeah,
it written up is not the
yeah.
point. That's not the work. And if you're teaching rhetoric and composition, the work is the writing. And that's why they feel more threatened by AI. But AI is not going to do everything in the world. It's going to do some of the writing stuff that looks like some of the stupid writing assignments that we give.
Right.
If it was a authentic kind of experience that you're having, AI is not going to have experienced it to be able to write that for you, but it can help you get the grammar right or help you make it a more interesting title or things like that. I'm trying to think about something that you kept saying, and of course I agree. A lot of what AI is like synthesizing from lots of different places. So I have a cake analogy about whether it's okay to use AI for something or not. So do you guys bake? Can you
No,
bake? No. Right. So some
but I
I
people
cook.
cook.
are going to
I
become
cook. My
bakers.
wife is
You
the
cook.
baker, though.
So some people are going to become bakers and they like to bake from scratch. They have the equipment, they have the skills, they can make a really good cake that way. If it's
Hmm.
like a birthday, maybe some people can do so much better, right? And then there are people who are cake decorators. The cake, they can use cake mix because what they're going to spend their time on is the decoration of the
Right.
cake, right?
Hmm.
I cannot decorate very well, but I can make really good cakes. But I have other friends who,
They just don't
whatever the
look good,
cake,
right?
it looks fine, but it's not like overly elaborate, right? So if you're going to focus on the decoration, like the Nailed It show, then use cake mix, get that done quickly so you can focus on that, right? But if you're going to become a wedding planner, you don't even need to make the cake. You can outsource the cake, right?
Hmm.
And then if it's a kiddie birthday party, you can get Twinkies.
Yeah.
And you just need to decide who you are there. And what's the thing in your life is the thing that you need to bake from scratch because that's your area that you need to become an expert in. And you don't want to relegate that to AI because you're the one who's going to invent new things here or
Hmm.
discover new things here. And AI doesn't know that. And what's the thing that you want to save time and give it to AI, like the cake mix, so that you can do the decorating kind of thing. But I was also thinking about what you were saying about synthesis. And I was wondering if I need to add something to this cake analogy about how AI can actually mix multiple cake mixes into one. So you might end up with a cake mix that is really creative and interesting because it got brownies and vanilla cake together and gave us something interesting, which sometimes bakers do on their own, but AI might imagine something that we hadn't imagined.
Hmm.
Or it might go really badly.
Right.
But
Marble
that's a thing
cake.
to keep in mind. Marble cake is not, yeah, that was probably discovered
Or
by mistake, right?
or chili in your, I mean, there's stuff that you sit there
Yeah.
and you go, wow, this is really amazing, but I can't
How did
imagine who
anyone
would put
think
these
of
two things
that?
together, right?
Yeah, exactly. So now I'm starting to think that that's something to keep in mind as well, is like, because the cake mix is like a template, whereas AI is not really a template.
Right.
It sometimes gives you
So,
a
how
template,
can we get
sometimes
back
doesn't.
to openness and hospitality to wrap up
Mm.
today's podcast? Um, we have
Use
focused.
AI to build open spaces. I mean, that's
I was going to
fundamentally what
say
I'm
we
trying to do.
have spent an inordinate amount of time on AI for
Mhm.
good reason, but let's move beyond that. And
Mhm.
it's going to be in the mix. I said that
Mhm.
on purpose. Um,
Yeah.
But but my interest, again, being outside the academy, is this openness and this interplay between people with disparate interests that don't align with the academy or do, but they're outside. And then that's what I appreciate so much about your position, Maha, is your hospitality approach. It's like, sure, come on in. Here's what we're doing. What can you add? You know, what questions do you have? And it's just it's almost unique. I won't use the word, but it's almost unique in my experience across academia. And I really appreciate that. So I really want us to hear, your thoughts about that in the context of the current
Yeah,
situation, both technical and political.
yeah. So I think that if someone adopts the kind of intentionally equitable hospitality type of mindset, then your whole attitude towards how students might be using AI would change. Your whole attitude towards just having these conversations where people are on different parts of the spectrum and finding ways to make space for everybody to have these conversations will be different because your intent is to make sure everybody listens. But also, the intentionally equitable hospitality looks at who is furthest from justice. And if you look at the AI conversation, the majority of people who are taking the platforms are white men. People need to amplify and listen more carefully to the voices of people from the global south who are not colonized in their minds. Because what Tom was saying is, of course, a lot of us from this part of the world are colonized in our mindset. I am a completely Western educated person. I have only had British and American education except for 3 years in my life. And so I
Wow.
actually don't, I'm a very cultural hybrid person. I've only lived in the US for a year and the UK for a year, but I'm educated in that culture. And so, but I can still see the issues with this technology from that perspective. And so if someone keeps equity as, but if you don't have that, if you don't think equity is important, if you don't think social justice is important, everything we try to say here will be drowned out by the louder voices, by the voices that have the money, and the voices that are trying to save money, right? And not focusing on the humanist aspects of it. And so that's what I think needs to be done here. That we need to make more room um, for the furthest from justice to speak out about their experiences with AI.
And in order to do that, I'm going to suggest that I will get this up as quickly as possible, Maha, so that it will be
Okay,
available
awesome.
before you start. IEH, I guess I can use the acronym now after we've said it a few times.
Yeah,
Um, and,
it's a
so
mouthful.
I
It's a
want to
test.
invite people to join in. It's very affordable. There are many ways to participate and contribute, which is I
And
really
fee
appreciate.
waivers if someone can't pay at all.
Okay, I wasn't going to say that, but thank you for
No,
saying that.
I always say it's
Um,
just not on the Eventbrite. I'll explain to you why later.
yeah, no, that's fine. But
Mhm.
this is an invitation for people to come and participate. How long does it extend?
It's about 4 weeks for live
Okay,
sessions and other stuff in between,
right. So you do
asynchronous.
have synchronous live sessions
Yes.
and then 4 weeks of other ways to participate. I know that
Hmm.
most of they're not events. What do we call them?
Professional
They're
learning journeys.
Journey. There you
Learning
go. Journey.
journeys.
It's not a program. It's not an event. It's not a conference. Journey. I like that. Most of your journeys do include Padlets, so there is some visual communication.
You're a big
So
fan.
I assume that's going to be there too. And AI is becoming more useful for generating image descriptions because
That's
those of
true.
us that post images know we probably spend as much or sometimes more time trying to describe the image.
Yeah.
And I've taken workshops and like the way I've started describing images turns out to be completely useless. And you have to really, have an intentional approach to describing the image so
Yeah.
you can be concise and yet communicate the information that's needed by
Yeah,
the non-sighted
exactly.
person.
Yes, yes.
It's such a, like everything, it's complex. Um, but I'm looking forward to the next month of participating with you and all of our friends from around the world.
Mm.
Um, Tom, you have anything to wrap up with as we end up today's podcast?
No, other than to say, it's not technology, it's how you use it. Technology is amoral and you can use it. I have always looked at it as a democratizing force and a way of creating spaces for people to get together, whether those are online or in a physical environment. I mean, a building is a technology too. And so if you build buildings that have lots of places where people can get together in the hallways, as we were talking about earlier, you're going to increase the power of the learning that happens in that space. And if you build online spaces that do the same, then or virtual spaces or AI spaces that do the same sort of thing, and as long as you keep that goal in mind, you will empower people to have their own voices. And to me, that's the most powerful form of equity: is that you amplify voices that have been unheard. And that to me is what we need to be. We need to be telling these stories. So that's my, yeah. And I
And
applaud the
Maha,
work you're doing there.
any closing thoughts, Maha?
No, I hope people listen to this and join us. And if they can't make it for the IAH series, the Mid-Year Festival happens June, July, and August of every year. It's called Mid-Year, not Summer, because in the Southern Hemisphere, it's not summer in June. So, and there's an expression of interest on our website, so people can let us know what they'd like to hear about and if they can recommend speakers. And then once registration is up, we'll contact them so they can register faster.
Excellent. And
There will
I'll
be a lot of AI because a lot of people want that. So there'll be other things about well-being and social justice and imagination.
oh, good. I'm a big fan of Kieran Egan's work on imagination in education. I will include those links in the show notes that go out with the podcast, all the different platforms. So I just want to say that I've enjoyed our conversation and want to thank you, Maha Bali, for joining Bryan Alexander, Tom Haymes, and me today and talking with machines. Good day.
What's going down? Stop. Yeah, what's that sound? Everybody